and the silence is quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we would take the world to its feet. Move mountains, bring it to its feet.
Good afternoon. You're tuned into Ability Matters, the program that covers matters to do with abilities, disabilities and everything in between. We are one of the longest running disability-related shows in the world, starting as Headway on air all the way back in 2007 and now brought to you by My Home Living Care, an NDIS registered disability support organisation.
Well, yes, thank you, Sean. You're actually here with us today in the studio, so... Oh, don't forget, I've got to thank Tim for the past 2 hours of his lovely show, Through the Past Darkly. Good stuff, Tim. Thanks for the thumbs up. Good work. Lovely work. And yes, Sean, who do we have with us today? Of course.
Well, yes, I'm in the studio today replacing Beck. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it, so
yes.
That was a recording of me before. That wasn't live, but now this is live, Sean. And today we've got Chris from Optimum Health Services.
I almost forgot to do the cliche stuff. I say, good afternoon. You're listening to Ability Matters on your station, the Illawarra's favourite 106.9 Vox FM. Of course, there we go. I'm your host, Tony Sconimilio, and as per normal, or not normal, but here's Becky. So I've introduced saying that he's Becky.
Are you saying I'm not normal? Is that?
Oh, no. It depends. When's the last time you looked in the mirror?
Well, yeah, I was going to say you should wear a T-shirt with that on.
There we go. Yeah, that's all right. So, yes, you're in here replacing Beck today, are you, Sean?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, she's not well, and so we've got Chris from Optimum Health Solutions to talk a little bit about his work as a speech pathologist. If I can say that properly. Can't talk in front of a speech pathologist. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning.
How are you going today?
I think it might be afternoon now, Sean.
Oh, it is. I always do that. I don't know. I always say good morning when I do these things, and it's just after 12. So.
Well, yeah, it's only just crept into the afternoon hour. So
yeah, I know. I've only just started writing 2024, so that's my excuse. I'm definitely not normal in terms of time. So, you're coming today to talk a little bit about the work that you do. Thanks for coming in.
No problem.
Yeah, and I guess most people would know, but I guess we'll start off just with a little bit of a quick rundown on what a speech pathologist is and I guess isn't. Just quickly in a couple of sentences, what's a speech pathologist? We'll get into it more detail later on.
Well, like allied health deals with therapies for health generally, speech pathology is to do with anything communication and swallowing. So if you have, I think a lot of people are familiar with speech sounds as something that you might go to a speech pathologist with a small child who has a lisp.
Do you mean like syllables as well? Is that enunciation something different?
I think as far as speech is concerned, it might be a number of different things, but it would be whether you can say the individual speech sounds.
Fair enough, sorry.
But it gets complicated. There can be different reasons for that.
I'm just reading into it a bit too deep because I know I did speech pathology myself back in the day, but yeah.
Well, I'm thinking that you might have done something which was more about finding words. So you knew what the words were in your head, but you actually had to remember how to say them again.
You mean like word finding difficulty? Is that the one? Yes,
absolutely.
Right. You're on the game. Good stuff. You're a professional. I like it.
And so that's a very good demonstration, actually, of how you have to be quite aware of all of the different parts neurologically that go into communication. And communication is not necessarily just saying, but it's also understanding. And it's also whether people understand culturally all of the things that go into communication, like gestures, and with neurodiverse people, whether they can read emotions on people's faces, whether they understand social circumstances and social scripts.
Okay, so I don't know, if you could rebrand it, maybe communication pathology would be...
We really should be called communication pathology.
Yeah.
Like I have said to multiple people, 100% of any interaction that you're going to have, any activity is going to involve communication, even if it's when you are being expected to listen or you have to wait and communication isn't available to you at that moment. It's still something out there in our interactions that you have to know when is the appropriate time to do participate.
Yeah, so even someone ignoring you is communication, really.
Exactly.
And why are they ignoring you? And
when I come and stand next to you, and the distance that I stand is communication, because that's giving you a message as to whether I'm being friendly or unfriendly or uncertain.
Aggressive even.
Aggressive.
Interesting. All right, so there we go. We've got some little tidbits there of some of the things we're going to talk about later. I think we'll play a couple of songs now and we'll come back and have a little chat about young Chris growing up and some of the things that led him to where he is today.
A bit of the behind-the-scenes sort of thing. Lovely. Okay, well, I'm going to open up today's show with Aussie classic here, a bit of Johnny Diesel, or Diesel, Crying Shame from 1989. And yes, that was just Stevie Wonder with Part-Time Lover from 1985. The time now is 12 minutes past 12. And let's get back into the interview with Chris and Sean. Yes, sorry for the momentary lapse of reason there. Thank you. Go for it.
All right, so now let's dig a little bit deeper into the past of Chris, the young Chris. Where were you born? You know, talk to me a little bit about little Chris growing up, the young Chris.
Well, I grew up in...
begins.
Where's that spotlight? We'll put it
I grew up in Canberra and I was heavily into music and acting when I was small. Like, I can remember going to acting and music kind of things all of my school life. That was the most important place for me.
So like primary and high school?
I think I went to my first acting workshop when I was 4.
Wow.
Which I remember very strongly, and I started in like choirs and things when I was 8, started playing instruments when I was also 5, so that was very much my life.
Were your parents musical or...?
My mother definitely was. I mean, she was a social worker with a great musical interest who then became a professional singer for a while.
Okay, interesting.
Lovely.
My dad was in the public service, which is, we were in Canberra. I mean, no surprise there.
Yeah. 90%.
But he was also very much into photography, and his first job was running a photography studio.
Okay, so that's an artistic...
so there's strong artistic bent. So my life for a very long time was definitely towards the arts and performance, and being on stage was the thing that I liked. I ended up in opera eventually because that's what my voice did, and being on stage, it's a stage thing really. It's about playing somebody else and being a character.
Which I will talk about that. I want to get back to that in a sec, because I think there's a really interesting thing about communication and communicating a character who's not you, and I think there's a real interesting kind of...
broadcast, if you will.
Yeah, and how it leads into what you do and say. But just before we do, opera, what kind of opera? Like, I don't know much. Is it baritone? Or what kind of voice were you?
Look, I'm a tenor, so I often played heroic roles, like romantic heroes, like Prince Charming and Cinderella.
Is that what tenors do normally? They're the heroic.
Yeah, they're usually the heroes. They're high.
Okay.
So if you want to think of it in musicals, then you're looking about people like Jean Valjean in Les Misérables.
Okay, all right.
Or even higher. Okay. And my voice was high enough that it really was too high for musicals and definitely for like opera. Think of Pavarotti. That's what I did.
And the three tenors and
that's what I did.
That's a better example, yes.
So, and you would have seen me in the Sydney Opera House, playing a featured or leading role, and I spent a lot of my career doing that overseas.
No, where overseas?
We were based in Germany, and I performed throughout Europe, a lot in Germany, in the United States.
Quicker to say where you didn't probably go.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, it's a big place. It was an international life. It was going from place to place and hotel to hotel, and there were lots of experiences where I found that my communication was wanting because I didn't actually speak the language or I didn't understand. I mean, we got into a huge problem once because when we moved from apartments, the Germans needed to know that we were registered with the police for where we lived. And so we moved from one place to the other, and that, to be registered there was a word which was to be angemeldet. And then we went into the office and we said, do we need to angemeldet ourselves at the other place? And they said, no. And we got in trouble because we didn't. What we needed to do was melden, which was go from one place to another.
Yep.
So it's just, you just realise how powerless you are.
When was this? Was this before the Berlin Wall fell?
It was, we moved over just as that happened.
Okay.
So I sang in a concert which was to do with the reunification of Germany. So it was a big time. And we actually then went over and lived in the previous Eastern Germany, and my son was born in an Eastern German hospital with very different expectations of what babies, and the way they wrapped him in a nappy was quite unusual to our Western sensibilities.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And when you say we...
my wife Jenny, who has followed me through thick and thin, who was amazing, who's also a teacher. So she has also lived experience of working with people with disabilities because she has many children in her educational experience.
Okay.
Back to the days when she had a child with Prader-Willi syndrome in her primary school class.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And she primary, high school?
Primary. She was music educated. We met when we were teaching at a music summer school for kids as, young adults. And that's where we met, and we've been together ever since.
Oh, fantastic. And there was children. You got one that was born in Germany. Any other children?
Matthew was born in Germany. Isabel was born here just. We came home and we had a window of opportunity in between gigs when she was born, and then when she was like a couple of weeks old, she was whisked off again to go overseas. Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. And then you did all this kind of amazing stuff all over the world, and now you kind of live in Nowra. How long have you been down there for?
Well, I've got this... No, we talk about country, and to me, country is about the coast. I grew up in Canberra, but the important times for me were done by the coast. I worked out in Europe that what I really missed was the water, and anything that I could do to have a water experience or be near the water was a good thing. Jenny grew up in Kiama, so that's not far from here, and my parents had a beach house in Maruya, so we bought a house we could afford then, which ended up being Calala Bay.
Where's Calala Bay exactly? Is that just south of Nowra?
It's actually east of Nowra on the northern side of Jervis Bay.
Okay. All right. Nice little... Is that the one that gets really overwhelmed by tourists at summer?
No, we live on the other side where we don't get so overwhelmed with tourists, and we'd quite like it to stay like that.
Yeah, okay. We won't tell anyone about it?
No, I don't live anywhere. It's okay.
The secret's out now.
Yeah. And so, you did all this amazing overseas, travelling and I guess some of the shows were like in places, other times you toured with shows and things like that.
Yeah, usually I'd go to one city and they have a theatre where I'm doing this production, and I spend 8 weeks there. And so I get to meet a new group of people, work very intensely with a new group of people, and then move on.
That's interesting. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but in terms of, like you say, the different kind of cultural communication things that go on, and having to kind of, I guess, relearn a new set of all those kind of cultural expectations every 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever would have been very interesting.
It is. And sometimes you are communicating with people who are speaking English as a second language speaker, or German as you speaking German, or French as a non-native speaker. So, communication differences and communication expectations is something that I dealt with, and also in playing a character, you are
yes
learning to think differently and going into somebody else's experience as well as moving differently to them. So you end up being very aware of gesture and very aware of different ways of thinking and different motivations for people. So it's a fertile environment for being ready to do something like speech pathology.
Yeah, okay. And then how did you get into speech pathology?
Well, my daughter told me I should. Basically, I'd come to a point where I was completely over being in the theatre and being an opera singer and all of those things, and was looking for something to do.
Looking for a change.
And she was looking for stuff in university, and she was going, I think I should do this, or maybe this, or maybe this. And she was going through that process of deciding, and she said, oh, by the way, Dad, you should definitely do speech pathology. So I went, okay, and I looked into it. And I realised that my history had prepared me very well to do this job, because it not only included vocal function, voice is really important for people who lose their voice. So all of that singing stuff and the singing anatomy and stuff was important. The anatomy,
breath control and...
Yeah, but also the muscles of speaking are the muscles of swallowing. So I'd been really set up for all of that as well. I had...
all the larynx and things like that, yes?
Yep. Mm-hmm. I had also, as a young child, an uncle who was a very favourite, not actual uncle, but my dad's best friend, who was a paraplegic. And
you stepped in for the role as uncle, yeah?
Yeah, he stepped into... I didn't actually have an uncle, so he was my uncle. And
adopted uncle, yes?
Yeah, it was interesting to know his experience, because his experience of being a paraplegic through accident as a small child was that being a paraplegic meant that nobody thought that he had any mental acumen at all, and he was put into something they called a sheltered workshop and was taught to assemble very simple electrical components into a device. He ended
very basic, yeah.
He ended up being a great advocate for disability access and for disability itself, went on to become a social worker and was doing a lot of social research.
It's interesting because we were talking about this before we got on air, but I think it's always interesting when we talk about people with disabilities, the conversation suddenly focuses on what people can't do.
Exactly. Negatives.
Negatives and obviously there are realities that people got to, there's supports and things that people need, but, when I'm at a party or somewhere, I don't talk about things I can't do. I'm very good at hiding that.
Promoting yourself.
But we do tend to put this spotlight on people's inabilities, and that's a great example, I think.
Look, it's a really good example of what I do. I'm looking for workarounds for every client that I've ever got. It's not about fixing them. I think that there's an attitude out there that I'm going to send somebody to you because they can fix them.
Because they're broken and they've got to be fixed.
It's not about that. It's like saying, you do it this way, let's find a way that the world can come closer to you and you can come closer to the world.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's take that point to step in there and break things up a bit with some music. I've got some Beach Boys with Don't Worry Baby from 1964, followed by some Robbie Dupree, and then we'll go from there. Thank you. Yes, and that was just Robbie Dupree with Steal Away from the year 1980 from the album Street Corner Heroes. And right now, of course, this is still Tony Sconimilio in the chair, but with Sean and Chris this time, yes. We're going back into it and go for it.
Did you say the time? 29 minutes to 1?
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe it is that. So
we're after 12:30. That'll be
Yeah, so it's either 12:31 or 29 minutes, 12 or 29 minutes to 1, whatever you like. So Chris, as we were talking before, is a speech pathologist, although we could change that really to communication pathologist. So what is a communication pathologist? What do they do on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock sort of thing?
Look, day-to-day basis, yes.
I think that our brief is incredibly broad because it really does include everything communication. So if you think about how much you are communicating in your life, I would say in a waking activity, you're communicating in some way. It's not just with your voice, but it can be with your body.
Like a yawn?
Well, I don't know about a yawn, but I would still be interested in a yawn as a speech pathologist because that is showing some kind of function.
Because I'm just thinking now, as you get many things in the cliche movie sort of thing when you're waking up. Always do you're on a stretch sort of thing. That would be communicating, wouldn't it?
Well, in a sense, you are communicating with your daily routine when you get out of bed. What's the first thing that people do when they get out of bed these days?
Coffee.
I don't think so. I think they look at their phone. How many people look at their phone when they get out of bed? What are you doing?
Before they get out of bed for some people. Not pointing the finger at myself.
So you're looking, that's communication. You are contacting with your communication network. And I think more people are on their phone and communicating in different ways these days, and managing that and using that to its full potential without it being a detriment is actually a really interesting theme for speech pathology.
So
fair enough.
I guess on that, just to sort of deviate a little bit before we go a bit more into what technology and phones and iPads, I guess they're a big part of what you do.
Oh gosh, I mean, we use devices on things like iPads or more complicated devices to be speech devices for people who can't speak. Think of Stephen Hawking. They don't speak like that anymore. They can be much more conversant and sound like a real person. In fact, one of my clients has done voice banking to save his voice so that it can be put into a speech machine so that when he uses it, it feels like him.
So he's got a degenerative condition, I imagine. So speech banking, is that like saying 2,000 words or syllables, or how does that work?
It used to be like 2,000 words, but it's come down to really, we did it in half an hour.
Different syllables, that sort of thing, yes?
They have a list of sentences,
right,
and the technology is so good that they know what the sentences are and they map his voice.
In half an hour?
In half an hour. It's like...
Whoa.
He was quick, but, it was really very achievable.
I'm assuming there's some sort of AI that then gets in there and slices and dices it. And
running all of that and keeping up with the changes and knowing all of the systems, or at least the major systems, is more than a full-time job. But that's just one of the small areas that we do.
Yeah, okay. So, what else do you guys do?
Swallowing, of course. Swallowing is the same anatomy as the human voice. So
for speech, yes.
So for speech. So that is why it came to speech pathologists in hospitals, where people were concerned that they didn't want patients to aspirate or to take food down into their lungs when they swallow. It happens very commonly with people who have strokes and people when they're ageing. So it became the speech pathology job in hospitals to do swallow assessments for clients.
Like, is this in the last 20 years or how?
Oh, look, I'm really not sure. Okay. I mean, the whole time frame for speech pathology is incredibly fast anyway, because I think it was in the early 20th century, like something like around the First World War time, that they had operations developed for kids with cleft palate. When they had the operation to close the palate, they then had to re-educate them into how to speak.
Okay.
And so they brought people in from, I think it was the Central School of Speech and Drama, into St Bartholomew's Hospital. Ooh. And they started to work on therapies. And from that little thing, like occupational therapy emerged from sort of just giving patients something to do. And it's become this huge scope of practice.
That's interesting. So people from acting and singing got into speech pathology like you did.
Well, yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
And when I was teaching singing, which I started to do when I was still quite young and grew up with a mother who was teaching singing, there are a lot of the skills that would be similar to working with a voice client or working with elements of getting understandable modelling of communication behaviour.
Speech and whatnot,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when you talk about swallowing, I know in what I've done over the years, working with people who maybe have thickened fluids, or, the way that food's prepared, cooked, mushed up or not, is part of that as well.
I think that a great difficulty usually is that the stuff that's usually going to go down will either be very thin, like water, so that will go faster, and if it's a bit thicker, then it won't go into the airway so quickly. So you thicken it up, and people unfortunately can't have the experience of drinking water or normal tea and coffee without it being thickened. And then also because it's difficult to masticate food and break it down, then...
Big fancy word for chewing there. Thank you.
Sorry, I will try.
Hey.
It's what happens when you wear a professional hat and write too many reports.
That's what I was like before when I just hopped out of my mindset. When I was coming back into what I was clinging on to a lot of my big fancy words I use at university. So I was told to try and tone down my level of level of vocabulary, and now I sound I'm forcing myself to sound very plain and simple, which is very
And that's my job, to help people on support teams to work out how to communicate with clients when they might have difficulty understanding. And one of my really biggest challenges is to help people working with people with disability to understand that just because you say something doesn't mean it's going to be understood by a client, and that can have ramifications. So it's that whole working with care teams that's also a big part of our role.
Yeah, because communication is just the message received. It's not what I think the message should be, it's what the other person's picking up.
How they've interpreted it.
Yeah, and I've worked with people in the past, where they were sort of, I guess, non-verbal, and there's a whole lot of challenging behaviours or behaviours of concern where people would get sort of, very anxious and act out on that. And some of them putting a hand up in a stop motion was very effective. Some of them you did that and it would trigger them. It would increase the behaviour. So
it's all individual. And so you have to develop a plan for communication
based on
for every person.
Yeah, very interesting. So what's a typical client? I mean, how long's a piece of string? I know, but, what's a lot of the work that you do generally kind of involve?
Apart from what we've talked about, I do everything because I am in an area where it's a very general practice field. Some people might be more specialised. I see adults and I see kids. I see a lot of kids with a trauma or autism or ADHD background. I also see kids with fetal alcohol syndrome, and that all affects their communication and their socialisation. So that is quite a large part of what I do. But it will also be people in supported independent living houses and their work with care teams, work with families that are complicated. Yeah, I don't do that much swallowing, but that's often still included in supporting a client with communication as well, because they're going to go into care of some sort when they do, for instance, go to a day program and they live in a group living situation. They need to have mealtime management plans very often, or at least a behaviour management plan that involves communication for how to manage mealtimes.
Okay, all right. So now we've got a bit of a more in-depth understanding there. We're going to go to a song, but before we do, you picked a song, Chris. Tell us a little bit about it.
Oh, look, out of the millions that I could choose and what you might have in your library...
Sorry to jump in. He found it very difficult to choose just one song, but...
I chose Bring Him Home because has one of the songs I like to sing, and I think it expresses a feeling about caring that I would like to think is something that we do in our industry. So it's also sung by Anthony Warlow, who is a good Wollongong boy and somebody that I've briefly come across and my wife used to play for.
Whereabouts would you say the song Bring Him Home is from?
Oh, yeah. What's
from Les Misérables.
So it's like an operatic play?
It's a musical.
Musical, okay. Yeah.
But music theatre, which is what
musical theatre.
And just before you press play there, interestingly, I'm actually related to Anthony Warlow, which Chris didn't know this. He's my sister's husband's uncle, so I guess he's my uncle-in-law. I've never met him.
Uncle-in-law.
But
wow,
I'm related,
right.
So, they say everyone in Wollongong knows everyone, so there you go. All right, let's see this
6
music.
degrees of separation.
Not in Wollongong, only one, I think.
Fair enough. 1 degree, I'll have to remember that one for next time. Okay, here is Anthony Warlow's Bring Him Home from the Les Misérables musical. Yes, that was just Harry Nilsson with Best Friend from 1969. Very, very short little track then, but I just found it the other day and, wow, this is good. I have to include that somewhere along the lines. But before that, we heard from Anthony Warlow with Bring Him Home from the Les Misérables.
Les Misérables.
Les Misérables musical.
Or Les Miserables for the Aussies.
Yes.
Or Les Mis. Les Mis.
Les Mis, yeah. Les Mis musical.
Good singing. My uncle's got good singing, doesn't he? Uncle Anthony, Uncle Tony. All right, so we're sort of coming in the home stretch. You're with an organisation we mentioned before, Optimum Health Solutions. I've known about them for a little while. I'm very interested in obviously the work they do, but why they do the work they do. What's the kind of mission there that Optimum Health Solutions are looking to achieve?
I think the mission that attracts me is working with other allied health professionals, because when I talked about, speech being 100% communication, I would say that we are about that communication world, but we're less about the physical world. But it matches very well with two other disciplines, occupational therapy, which is about the interaction of a person with their physical environment. So it comes into wheelchairs and all those sorts of things, but also emotional regulation. And then also with behaviour support, where you're looking at behaviours that are very difficult to manage, but which very often come from that kind of emotional regulation, but also almost all the time there is communication involved in that. And misunderstandings is probably the biggest form of behaviour concerns.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like one of the things that was around when the NDIS was being put together, and one of the big kind of examples of the benefits of the NDIS, and I think it should have been called the National Disability Investment Scheme, not the insurance scheme.
Yes.
And the reason is because...
investment sounds better, doesn't it?
Yeah. And
more positive.
Insurance is not sexy. Like that doesn't get people excited. But having a young man...
Who wants to be an insurance salesman?
That's right, exactly. A young man with autism, if they can grow up and learn how to communicate their needs, they don't get to 16, 6'2", 120 kilos of just pure anger because they can't interact with the world successfully. If they can learn, through the investment from the National Disability Insurance Scheme to communicate that, then they're going to have a better life. People around them are going to be safer, and I guess the government, what they were excited about was the support needs will be less and the costs will go down. So
that's true, and I think that if you've got therapy teams working together, so we actually talk. It's very easy to be in your little isolated puddle, looking at your isolated concerns.
Yes.
But what I think that my time at Nowra with Optimum has been is that we've got really good contact between the staff members, and I'm talking to an OT and I'm talking to behaviour support, so we're pooling ideas, and it's more than the sum of its parts in that sense.
Synergy.
And we're getting to a better outcome for the client. So that's why I like that as a model so much, and why I really want to do that going forward.
Yeah, and I guess from my experience, I was working down there a little while ago. I think Optimum did that really well. And there was a genuine cross-fertilisation between the professionals, not just people having the offices in the same place, but a real genuine commitment to really creating that synergy.
And no matter all the best will in the world, the busy lives that we all lead, scheduling a meeting with somebody or with all the other participants as therapists, with all the other therapists involved in that person, is almost impossible.
Yeah.
And you get into email chains and things, but when you can just over lunch chat about a client, it's a completely different thing.
It's something, it's quite amazing really. And I think really at the end of the day everyone benefits. The person getting the therapies benefits, the government, it costs less because the therapies are, I think, more effective, and the therapists are more effective because their time's more useful.
And I think that there are other ways that we could improve as a service. I mean, I know that you were wanting to get onto, if I could wave a magic wand, what would I do?
Let's pretend you're Harry Potter and you've got a magic wand there. What are you going to wave it? What's the world going to be like after that?
I think that it would be a lot more useful if in primary schools every school had access to a speech pathologist and an occupational therapist, and that we spend so much time travelling to these schools to see our clients that if we were more integrated in the system, as they are in other parts, other countries and other states, we would save a lot of the NDS's money, and we would also get to kids who maybe aren't fortunate enough to be on the scheme, but who have really significant needs as well. And I think if we could restructure it in that way and put it into more of an education budget and see it as something that everybody can access. It would be really beneficial.
And we talked about interdisciplinary kind of connections. I think having the teachers as part of that team as well and giving them the skills and the strategies.
Absolutely. I mean, the best outcomes I have for students is when I can have a good relationship with a teacher. And, without that, you're only achieving half of what you could.
Yeah, and schools are where, I guess, a lot of foundations put down for the rest of people's lives, and it's like a house. If you've got a foundation that's not solid and flat and good, then anything you build on top of it's going to be, not ideal. So having that from the start and having that school environment build that strong foundation, I think, is key. Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely about learning, but I think it's also about being in a community. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yes, yeah. As George Costanza said, we live in a community, people. What else would change?
You'll remember that, my uncle, who was a paraplegic, he was a campaigner for ramps and for toilets and things for disabled people. And I think that, he lived in Victoria, and Victoria probably has some of the best facilities in Australia, and that's thanks in part to him. But I would say that with all of that concept of inclusion, we've lost out on the communication because communication is not so visible. It's not something that you can build, but I think awareness of communication deficits for people who might not like noisy environments, people who can't say what they want to. I went into a school as a speech pathologist last year when I was having a hip operation, and I had to be supported by a cane at that point. And I was with my allied health assistant, and when I walked up to the receptionist, she turned to the allied health assistant and asked her what we were there for, obviously because I was, somebody with needed support and therefore not capable of engaging.
Yeah, that whole deficit, well, if you can't do this, there's probably a lot of things you can't do kind of.
And there is a whole minefold of people. There are a huge number of people who don't engage in things because it's too difficult. Won't go into the council to ask a question, won't go to the library, won't go to a swimming pool.
Too hard basket.
It's too hard. It's because there's that barrier, and it's partly a barrier of understanding how to engage with somebody if there's different communication.
Yeah, and I think like the ramps are a good example. There's often that sort of stereotypical thing it benefits someone in a wheelchair, but it does benefit people with hip replacements. It benefits parents with prams. It benefits athletes with broken legs. It benefits people that have got, heavy shopping. We've got the elevator over at Unanderra train station through Beck, who's normally on here, did a lot of work with that. And people have thanked her because now they can catch the train to the airport when they're going away because they don't have 500 steps to go up with suitcases. So it benefits so many more people.
I think if every person-facing employee, officer, whatever you like to call them, were more aware of the communication message they're giving and receiving, then we'd probably have better services as well.
Yeah. All right, okay. Let's... I'll go and borrow that wand off Harry Potter and we'll get working, eh? See what we can do. Well, thanks for coming in today, Chris. I really appreciate your time.
No worries.
It's been very eye-opening.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
It was fun.
Much appreciated.
Beautiful.